I'm Tenitra Batiste, and yep, it's finally a wrap for the Underwear Olympics.
I'm Tori McElhaney, and while the Combine answered a couple questions, we still have a lot more.
I'm Freeman, and oh boy, we get to talk about who's going to be the Falcons' next quarterback today.
I'm Jarvis Davis, and I am so excited. I got to watch grown men run around in their underwear.
Rise up, A-Town. It's the Falcons Squad. Everything Atlanta Falcons every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from the ATL. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Straight from the ATL, the Falcons Squad Show starts now. Falcons Squad Show, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman, Locked On analyst Jarvis Davis, and Falcons senior reporter Tori McElhaney. The Squad Show is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So just because 8 got tagged doesn't mean that 8 is staying. We'll take that under further review. And as we told you, the Underwear Olympics is a wrap. We'll talk about who impressed. And also, can one more hire make a difference in the DB room? We'll download on it. But first, as Aaron alluded to, more commentary on QB1 and QB2. So Kevin Stefanski was asked recently if Michael Penix Jr. is his starting QB when healthy. And he said, quote, "I'm not big on giving out positions in February," although we're now here in March. I think you guys now know how I feel about Michael, and I'm excited about his trajectory. I also know he's focused on his rehab, which is the right thing to do. So Jarvis, did Stefanski say anything there that gives you any more insight on his thoughts on MPX being QB1 than Stefanski already has?
Absolutely not. He understands that the man has talent, and he also understands that the man has to go through rehab. And I think that I feel like we have to take some initiative, as the media, hey, there's only so many ways you can ask that question at this point, because he's been asked it several different ways. It's been kind of like cooked up, fried, and then giving it to him. Then they scrambled it. Some people boiled it and kind of gave it to him, gave him the question to him. Some people doggone air fried the bad boy and gave it to him. I'm just like, man, there's only so many ways you can ask, hey, are you guys confident that Michael Penix Jr. is going to be the quarterback for the next 8 years? Like, no, you can't answer that question right now. So I feel like right now where Kevin Stefanski is, he understands he has talent, and he wants to see if he can get to be 100%, learn his system, and when that happens, we just don't know at this point.
Yeah, and Tori, I think that Jarvis said it best, but hey, because the question was asked and Kevin Stefanski answered it somewhat, we're just asking it again because we can. But ultimately, do you think he really said anything there that gives us any more insight on his thoughts on MPX being QB1 than maybe Kevin Stefanski already has?
No, not at all. I mean, I'm in the same boat as Jarvis. Like, there is just a certain extent of, like, you don't want to paint yourself into a corner. I think I've said this before. Like, if you're Kevin Stefanski or Ian Cunningham, like, saying some type of declarative statement on anybody right now on this roster could potentially do more harm than good. I think it's why you saw Ian Cunningham even say what he said about Caden Ellis.
Yes.
When he was asked specifically about him and being like, like, we need to evaluate him. We need to evaluate the linebacker market. Like, making these declarative statements on anyone who's not just an absolute like shoe-in, like Bijan freaking Robinson and Drake London and Chris Lindstrom. Like, there's only a select handful of individuals that you can make declarative statements on this roster. And at this point in time, the quarterback position and Michael Penix is not one of them for every reason that Jarvis laid out. It's not to say that Michael Penix won't be the person and the starter and the franchise level quarterback that I think a lot of people hope he can be. But saying any of that right now doesn't make any sense and doesn't do any good for someone like Kevin Stefanski, who's been in this job for a month and a half.
Yeah. And Aaron, I think Tori kind of gave it some good verbiage there, painting yourself into a corner. And it's something that I'm sure, as you mentioned, Tori, being in that position just for the last 6 weeks, you're still trying to understand little things like, hey, where's the second restroom in case the first restroom is backed up or something, I can't get to it. Little things like that, administrative to-dos, and trying to get up to speed as quickly as possible as you approach the combine, as in last week, the draft, and even free agency. So yeah, Aaron, you got to think that right now, that question probably doesn't, or that statement from Kevin Stefanski probably doesn't give us any more insight than we already have, because you just kind of can at this point.
Yeah, we've been talking about this since Kevin Stefanski got hired, and every time someone asks him a question about Michael Penix, people are like trying to read into what does that mean, and is that, and it's just like they've been non-committal from the start. They've praised Michael Penix when he's deserved praise, but there's no real reason, as Kevin Stefanski said, for them to hand out starting quarterback jobs in February, especially for a player like Michael Penix, who's dealing with the injury that he's dealing with and has been dealing with a number of these injuries. This is his third ACL tear in 6 years. And so basically when you do the math, it's like, it's basically a coin flip whether or not Michael Penix is going to tear his ACL in any given season going back over the last 6 years. So like sitting here and being like, this is definitely our guy at this stage in the offseason just doesn't make any sense for the Atlanta Falcons to make any sort of commitments. Now, 6 months from now, like that's really the time when hopefully the coach will be willing to commit to a guy of like, this is our starter. This is the guy we're going to have week 1. This is the guy that we believe in can carry us. That's when you need to hear these commitment statements at that point. But I think for the time being, you go through the initial press conference, right? The combine is going to be kind of the last time that Kevin Stefanski is trotted out in front of the media to interview with various outlets and whatnot, and will be asked this question. And then probably he will get a little bit of a break for like the next 2 months until after the draft. And then depending on what happens in the draft, depending on what happens in free agency, then he'll get asked questions about other quarterbacks or Michael Penix again. And then we'll go through this whole thing during the summer throughout every, training camp. Like, did you see, whoever QB2, QB1, whatever you want to call it, QBC, whatever we're going to label these guys as, are you ready to commit? Like, so we're going to go through this cycle again, but like at this point in time, there's really no reason for Kevin Stefanski to say anything differently than what he has said so far.
Yeah, I'd love to think, Free, that we're going to get a 2-month break, but somehow I figure he'll go on some podcast, maybe this one, or he'll go on some show, and somebody's going to find a way to attempt, as Jarvis said, to remix, reshape, recook the same question. But yeah, we should be so lucky that 2 months would be the amount of time that we won't have to hear that question again. Speaking of quarterbacks, now that we know the Falcons are set to release Kirk Cousins, we also know that the rumor mill for who will be QB2 will swirl maybe until further notice, maybe for the next couple of months, who knows. But the most recent rumors are linking Joe Flacco and Tua Tagovailoa to the Falcons. ESPN's Dan Graziano said he heard from a lot of people in league circles that Flacco is expected to join Kevin Stefanski in Atlanta. Same article, different writer Jeremy Fowler went on to say an NFL coach told him to keep an eye on Tua to the Falcons. Are either of these your choices? Back up, at least to begin, for Michael Penix Jr. Jarvis, let's start with Joe Flacco.
Well, when I think about Joe Flacco, and I'm one of those people that would like to see Michael Penix be the guy going forward. If they sign Joe Flacco, like, all right, cool. That gave me a little bit of hope, a slither of hope. Like, oh, okay, rehab must be going well. All right, Joe can hold it down for however long they need to hold it down, and Joe will understand that once Michael Penix comes back, hey man, you're going to see what you got going forward. So yeah, I think Joe would be obviously he's very familiar with the system, with Kevin Stefanski's system, and I think that he will be a true placeholder. Now, Tua, on the other hand,
hold that thought.
Yeah.
I want to go around the room first on Joe Flacco, then we will get to Tua. Yes, because I think that the approach. No, and you made it a point, JD, that I think the approaches or the mindset are totally different when you consider Flacco versus Tua. So I wanted to stick with Joe, Tori, because that's truly your veteran QB who understands he's coming in to be QB2 and a temporary QB1, if you will. As Jarvis mentioned, that's one mindset that you might go into that thought process with. So for you, well, how do you think about Joe Flacco, let's say, as a consideration for that veteran QB who understands this is a QB2 and QB2 only job, potentially?
Yeah, I think this is like the easiest and the safest route that this Falcons team and organization could take at this point in time because of Joe Flacco's previous work with Kevin Stefanski and what they did together, like with the Browns. And I think that does go a long way in feeling like, okay, this is already like a rushed scenario with brand new leadership everywhere. So bring in somebody who you don't feel like you have to rush to get to week one.
Yeah.
Joe Flacco is somebody who you really wouldn't have to because he has worked with these individuals before.
Mm-hmm.
He's been around the block. He's seen pretty much everything. So I understand that from a just from a thought standpoint of what the safest option could be. And that's actually something that at the combine, talking to a bunch of different people in a bunch of different news outlets, they kind of all said the same thing of like, it makes the most sense for the Falcons to bring in kind of a veteran guy who already has a step up, who can come and just be your guy for until, Michael Penix comes back, because I think there are a lot of media members at the combine who are still pretty high on Michael Penix and felt that he deserved the shot to see if he's the guy moving forward. So I think that's kind of like, at least from talking to the wide range of individuals at the combine, that was kind of the trajectory that I felt like a lot of people landed on with the Falcons.
Yeah. And Aaron, I will say the same. I think Joe Flacco, I'll use Tori's words, is that safest pick for all the reasons that she laid out. What do you think about the possibility of Joe Flacco being one of two that the Falcons are reportedly targeting to back up Michael Penix Jr.?
Yeah, I think Tori nailed it. Like, when you look at the multiple times Kevin Stefanski has worked with Joe Flacco, you look at the fact that when Jeff Ulbrich was in New York, Joe Flacco was the quarterback that kind of came in when they needed to pivot off of Zach Wilson a couple of times there. You look at the fact that Ian Cunningham got his start in Baltimore the year that they drafted Joe Flacco in the first round. And then in Ian Cunningham's, I believe, final year before in Philadelphia, before he joined the Bears, who did they sign to be Jalen Hurts' backup? Joe Flacco. So this is a person that everybody who is in the position to influence the decision-making of the Falcons, you can even throw Matt Ryan, him and Joe Flacco's relationship goes back many years coming into the league together. So like, this is a person that everybody in this building knows pretty well. Yeah. And so it just makes a lot of sense that if you're looking for somebody who can come in and be that bridge quarterback, Joe Flacco makes a ton of sense.
And I think in my little head, the only other quote unquote veteran that I think I would have been halfway comfortable with, or would be halfway comfortable with, because I think at this point, Jimmy Garoppolo kind of understands that he is a QB2, like he's a backup QB, he's cheap, and he's only 34 versus 41. But I do see all the reasons that Joe Flacco would be the logical first choice of a veteran QB who understands that's just what you're going to be. So I think switching gears, Jarvis, to Tua, that's a totally different situation if you're bringing him in. It now kind of goes to backup or competition for Michael Penix Jr., because I don't think Tua Tagovailoa is leaving the Miami Dolphins or parting ways with that franchise thinking that he's just going to be a QB2 unless you get him to be willing to see that this could be a quote unquote prove it year, right? And he could be like some of the other veteran QBs out there who've taken that 1 year, shown that they still have it so that they can go sign with another team. But with that, Jarvis, of course, he brings a lot of salary cap issues to the table. But what are your thoughts about that report on Tua?
Well, I think that Tua is definitely going to be one of those post-June 1 candidates. They're going to go ahead and take their hit. I believe it's like $99 million, which is a big number. So you post-June 1, they can split that bad boy over 2 years, so they won't have necessarily take that hit in 1 year. So with that, I feel like it will be a situation where it's going to be a 1 year deal type situation. Prove it. You get a guy who's motivated to prove that, hey, he still belongs in this league. And then, if he plays well, I'm not necessarily saying you wait it out for Michael Penix Jr., but if he's playing well and he's in a nice flow for the offense, I think that you don't have to necessarily rush Penix back. because you want to see what he has going on as far as what he can bring to the table. So I feel like that will be one of those mutual type situations where both parties understand what this is all about, what this relationship is going to be. Like, hey, you got something to prove. We need somebody to be in this seat that can play some football and toss that bad boy all around the yard. And if you feel like you are a good fit for what we're trying to do on offense, then you go ahead and sign with us for a 1-year deal and 7-8 million, or whatever, So, or being that he has all that guaranteed money, you can sign for the vet minimum.
Yeah.
So you can really save some money if you start to have a conversation with Tua about what he wants to do after the 2026 season.
Yeah, Tori, what about you for Tua? A little bit of a different scenario than maybe picking up a Joe Flacco, but still some complications, but there's some positives there as well.
Yeah, I think that would be really interesting. Like, it's an interesting thought process. It's a different thought process, I feel like, completely from what Joe Flacco would be for this team and kind of what you are doing offensively. Mm-hmm. I would be really interested to see kind of what the deal ultimately amounted to and what it looked like. Like, that to me would tell me a lot about how they would view someone like Tua. Is like, what does that deal look like? What does the contract look like? What does the money look like? Because I feel like at this point in time, I could give you 3 or 4 different scenarios about all that signing Tua could look like. But until I know kind of what the actual deal is, that would tell me a lot about how they view Tua, how they view the system, how they view Michael Penix and where they are. I think that's something that I would be genuinely curious to see what happens. But I also think that kind of using the Baker Mayfield model of you go from a journeyman to a solidified quarterback who's, in arguably, I guess, the back half of their career, middle to back half, but doing things and running an offense very well. I'm not saying that Tua could go and do that or that that's anything that anybody's even thinking of, but there is kind of this proven record of what Baker did, where he was this journeyman for a year or two and then established himself. And I don't know, I think that's something that a lot of quarterbacks in this quarterback market right now could look at and be okay, there's opportunity that even if I do sign these journeyman type of deals, that it doesn't last that way forever.
Yeah, for me, the assumption and a lot of the insiders reporting are that Tua is going to, because of all the dead money that he's getting from the Dolphins, and basically they're going to be paying his salary this year, that he'll wind up signing for a veteran minimum deal. And it's a similar situation with what Russell Wilson dealt with when he left Denver and went to Pittsburgh 2 years ago on a veteran minimum type of deal. And I think when you put it that way, Tua becomes a lot more intriguing, because when you deal with all the stuff with Tua where it's you have the injury history. So even if you do go out there and get Tua coupled with Michael Penix, that third quarterback's going to be a lot more important, because it's well, there's a good chance that both of these guys could be injured at some point this season. And so you have to caveat that in the Tua equation. But when you look at the fact that he's going to be cut, if you can get him on, for $1.2 million, you're getting pretty decent bang for your buck with Tua Tagovailoa, regardless of what you think of him as a starting quarterback. For $1.2 million, it's okay, that's value, right? That's a guy that normally under normal circumstances would easily be worth 15, 20, 25, 30 million dollars or something, and you're getting him for a fraction of that percentage. And so you can sell on that point. Then you couple that with the expectation that he'll be a post-June 1 cut, as Jarvis said, and so you can sign him whatever and not have to worry about it impacting your ability to get compensatory draft picks in 2027. So those are some of the selling points on Tua, in addition to what he can bring to the football field as the quarterback that he can run an offense competently if you have the right system and the right weapons around him, like we saw in Miami for several years. And so those are going to be kind of the big questions with Tua here in Atlanta. So there's some upside there. The challenge is going to be that Tua is the caliber of quarterback that, if he plays well, Is he going to hand the job back to Michael Penix? And I think that's what Jarvis was sort of getting at earlier, where it's like you don't know if that's going to be the case. Like, there's certainly a world where Joe Flacco finds a fountain of youth, but I don't think anybody's really expecting Joe Flacco to start 17 games this upcoming season. There's going to be a ticking clock on that. But you can sign Tua, and you can, if he stays healthy and plays well, like you could convince yourself he could wind up starting 17 games this season. So that's really where the math differs on those guys. But, Tua's not going to have the same sort of appeal to a lot of folks just because he's been so up and down these last couple of years, especially in Miami.
Yeah.
But like you can, if you squint, you can be like, okay, like this could work, right? Like, that's kind of the player that Tua is at this point in time.
At this point, yeah. So 8 got tagged, but does that mean he's actually going to stay in Atlanta? We'll take that under further review. This episode of our Locked On Falcons Squad Show is brought to you by FanDuel. College basketball is nonstop. Big games, tight spreads, momentum swings every single night. From early tip-offs to late-night West Coast shootouts, there's always action on the board. And now FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential with a college basketball parlay profit boost. You can build any college hoops parlay you want, rivalry games, ranked matchups, whatever fits your read. You can mix spreads, totals and player props to match how you see the slate playing out, and you can apply the profit boost and instantly bump up the potential payout. Look at odds around your team if they are in season. Go safe, go bold, ride with the team you've been following all season. It's your parlay, your style, now with more upside behind it. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. Thank you for making the Falcon Squad Show your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. So switching gears to Kevin Stefanski's commentary about Kyle Pitts last week, let's start with what he had to say about Kyle Pitts. Quote, obviously, Kyle's a guy that I think very highly of, both professionally and personally, so excited to work with him. Obviously, his talent is evident. I can see it on tape and what he's been able to do in his career to date. He's a guy that we're excited to work with, close quote. So for you, Aaron, even after KP received the franchise tag, does this give any inclination that Pitts is guaranteed to be on this roster when training camp begins in July?
No, I don't think it guarantees anything, but like it goes back to what we've talked about with Kevin Stefanski's comments on Michael Penix. There's really no upside for Kevin Stefanski to be like, well, we don't really like Kyle Pitts at this point in time, like just to be like, I'm not that excited to work with Kyle Pitts this upcoming season. It just doesn't make any sense for him to say that. So to sit here and operate with the sort of default assumption that Kyle Pitts is going to be here, you got to say the right things. And as Kevin Stefanski noted, there's never been a doubt about Kyle Pitts' talent level. It's just the sort of consistency that has been the challenge over these last 5 years with him here in Atlanta. And so him saying what he said, I don't think really is a indicator that we know what's going to be where Pitts' whereabouts are going to be. I think if the Falcons get a good offer and they feel like they have an opportunity to replace Kyle Pitts, more importantly, in addition to that offer that comes in, I think there's a world where they move on from Kyle Pitts. As we know, Ian Cunningham is very obsessed with accumulating draft picks, and one of the ways that he can do so is by trading Kyle Pitts on the franchise tag. So I think that will remain an option for the Falcons. But yeah, if I was to sit here and bet, is Kyle Pitts going to be on this roster in 6 months? Yes. But I wouldn't necessarily read too much into what Kevin Stefanski is saying in the same ways that, him saying certain things about Michael Penix is not some definitive, guaranteed sort of, indication of how the team views Michael Penix and what his role is going to be. You just say the things in February, now March, of yes, we're excited to work with all the players that are currently in the building, and we'll see if they are still in the building 6 months from now and whether or not they're still as excited to work with those guys when it comes time to that. So we'll see.
So Jarvis, Kevin Stefanski said, obviously Kyle's a guy that I think very highly of, both professionally and personally. So excited to work with him. Obviously his talent is evident, but does that franchise tag mean that there's an inclination that he's guaranteed to be on that roster come training camp?
No, I don't think it's a guarantee by no means, right? But like you said, because like what Aaron was saying as far as the whole trade piece, I feel like that's on the table. I feel like a long-term contract on the table. And I feel like maybe that 1 year franchise tag might be on the table as well, because just going back to the TJ Hawkinson trade that was made before the trade deadline in season, that could be because, you know, people are having conversations with more of a sense of urgency at that time than they will be in this summer, right? Leading up to the season. So I feel like everything is on the table when it comes to whether or not Kyle Pitts is going to be on this roster, whether he's going to be on the roster, whether he's going to be traded, whether he's going to play on a 1 year deal, or they're going to figure out a way to get a long-term deal done. So I don't think that when you talk about guaranteed, no, I don't think that you can use that word with Kyle Pitts at this point.
Yeah, and Tori, I think guaranteed is probably a strong word. But again, Stefanski said when looking at KP, I can see it on tape and what he's been able to do in his career to date. He's a guy we're excited to work with. And of course, got the franchise tag. But again, we've seen time and time again that there are just no guarantees. You never know.
Yeah, I think I lend myself less to like really holding on to what Kevin Stefanski said about Kyle Pitts and more about what Ian Cunningham said about Kyle Pitts and the decision to franchise tag him. I think Ian Cunningham was very open about the fact that, like, hey, I've been in this job since January 29th. That's not a very long time to evaluate the full scope of the roster. I needed more time to figure out how we feel about Kyle Pitts and using this, franchise tag is a way to do that. It's a way to keep Kyle Pitts on the roster longer so you can make a decision on what you want to do with him in the future. And I think that is, when it comes to Kyle Pitts and the franchise tag, that's what I lean on more than anything else, is like, this is truly a mechanism to allow the Falcons more time to make a decision on him and what they want to do for him without the worry of him hitting the open market. I will say too that it's important to say as well that the tag is the non-exclusive franchise tag, which means that a player is like free to negotiate and receive the 1 year deal at the $15 million. But it also means that the Falcons hold the right of first refusal. Like, there's a lot of pieces of this that I won't bore people with the overall scope of it, but it just, again, to me is like they needed more time to figure out what they wanted to do with Kyle Pitts, and this is what they had the option to do. This was the option that allowed them the opportunity to do that, and that's where I that's as far as I go with it. Like, I think that it just leaves all options on the table, as these guys have said.
Yeah. And so that may be the more telling thing, to your point, Tori, not so much what Kevin Stefanski said, but the decision of Ian Cunningham and the Falcons to go with the non-exclusive tag versus the exclusive tag or even the transition tag. So yeah, that might be more of a tea leaf than anything. JD, Aaron, I don't know if you guys wanted to maybe chime in from what Tori was saying, just sharing what your thoughts are on Ian Cunningham's perspective on why the Falcons decided to go with the tag on KP and what that might mean in terms of reading the tea leaves about his future.
I think Ian just has been, the one thing about him, I feel like he's been as just about as upfront you can be as a general manager can be, especially when you're first coming on and there are so many things that are up in the air with this roster. You talk about a quarterback, you're talking about a unicorn tight end, so to speak. It's just so many storylines that or decisions that have to be made with this roster, and for him to kind of be as forthcoming as he has been in these introductory press conferences at the combine, and he's commented about Caden Ellis and where he's kind of falling or where he sits with this team, I just feel like, you know, if you pay attention, he's going to tell you kind of, not necessarily tell you exactly what they're going to do, but you can kind of get a good idea of where they're, or what the line of thinking is as far as how they're going to approach that player. So I feel like, you know, Cunningham has done a pretty good job of that. And I feel like with Kyle and his potential of being on his team, I feel like we won't be surprised when they do make the decision.
Yeah, I think Jarvis nailed it when it comes to Ian Cunningham, when it's come to whether it's Kyle Pitts, whether it's Caden Ellis, when it comes to guys that are free agents, like he has not necessarily said anything that is we're 100% firmly committed to making this guy a Falcon for life or anything like that. It's just been like, we'll see, you know, that's kind of how he's approached both of those guys. And then when it's come to Kirk Cousins being very straightforward of like, yeah, he's not going to be here anymore, right? And that gets to what Jarvis was saying, where it does feel like he has been a lot more straightforward with how he's approached this thing, and rather than just sort of saying a whole lot of nothing. And so I think those words are a little bit more meaningful because it does, you know, I'm not going to say it's the right approach or anything like that, but it is a little bit more of an honest approach rather than just like saying something that isn't anything. And it's like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do to interpret that, you know? But like he's approaching it, I think, the right way, where it's just like, look, these guys are free agents. We'll see if they're back. There's no reason for me to sit here and say with 100% certainty that these guys are going to be back. And as Tori said, like with Kyle Pitts, it's just like, this is going to buy us time to do whatever we need to do with Kyle Pitts, whether that's re-sign him, whether that's playing on the tag, whether that's trading him. All those things are still on the table as we sit here today, and we'll see how it plays out over the next 6 months.
Yeah. So the Underwear Olympics is a wrap. Woo! We'll talk about who impressed next up. This episode of our Falcon Squad show is brought to you by Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Sponsored Jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for. Skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. You can spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. So go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. So, Tori, you have returned from Indianapolis an entire week. Congratulations for surviving the Underwear Olympics yet again. Of course, the Falcons had to be locked in. I'm sure you had to be locked in every single day, really because of the positions that the Falcons need to address. So let's take a look back at each day and kind of if there's anyone you saw who impressed. And guys, I want you to chime in as well, because I know you've had so much fun and it was so exciting for you guys to watch 4 days of the Underwear Olympics. So Tori, let's start with day one, where the defensive linemen were on display. Anyone stand out to you?
I'll be honest. I think that like it kind of doesn't matter what I say. Like I think that the thing is, it's difficult because the Falcons don't have a first-round draft pick. And so all of the guys who you think are like standing out or doing things, it's like they're probably going to be a first-round draft pick. I think that like I was more intrigued by what people thought about like which position groups the Falcons would value than I was about any specific person. I also personally like, and hopefully the sky doesn't fall down on me, like the combine is fine. Like the combine is like you can go and you can run and you can do that, but we all know they're going to go to their pro days and they're going to do it again. Or, I think something that Kevin Stefanski said was like, I fall back on the tape more than hardly anything. So like, I'm not answering the question. I realize that, but it's really it doesn't matter which defensive lineman I liked. Like so I'm just kind of like here.
So you won't get fined by Locked On.
Well, I'm not at liberty to say who I like, so I'm not going to.
Understood. And so I'm going to come back to you with a different question, Tori. Hang tight.
Okay.
Bree, did you see anyone on day one, or let's just go to day two too, because like Tori said, it might be a little challenging with day one simply because your top D linemen are probably going to go in the first round. And who knows if the Falcons will be successful enough, Ian Cunningham, to get draft picks that maybe get them back in the first round. So maybe it makes it a little difficult. But if you look at day one with D linemen, day two with DBs, was there anyone that you saw that stood out to you?
Well, I like that Tori basically said that she was in Indianapolis to get shrimp cocktail and not really care about the players or anything like that. But when it comes to the DBs in particular, where I felt like there was cornerback is definitely going to be a position that has the potential to be a priority for the Falcons early in the draft. And I think when you look at the guys that are sort of projected in that day two range where the Falcons currently have picks, like there was a lot of guys that really stood out, especially, I've been pounding the table for the Falcons to get some more big corners in that room to sort of supplement and complement AJ Terrell a little bit better than all the various shrimp cornerbacks that they have in that room. And so there was a lot of guys out there like Malik Muhammad of Texas, Dalen Everett of Georgia, Davison Igbinosun of Ohio State, Takario Davis of Washington. A lot of these guys that are just big, fast athletes. And it's just like, okay, if you're looking for, and we'll see how long Mike Evans is in the division, but like you got to worry about Ted McMillan at this point in time for the future. And it's like, if we just need a big body just to throw at Ted McMillan for the next 12 years or whatever, I think this draft does provide a number of those guys. And I think a lot of those guys really stood out on day two of the combine, being able to showcase their athleticism, their size and whatnot. And that makes it very intriguing for the Falcons, especially in that round 2, round 3 range.
And Jarvis, for you, anybody on day one or day two, whether it's a D lineman or DB that stood out?
Well, for me, I look at guys like, Avion Terrell, and like, this is so weird to me because I don't know why, but I really like D'Angelo Pons. So, when I think about what Free just said, talking about all these shrimp cornerbacks, you know what I'm saying? So it was like, oh, gotta stay away from him because Aaron doesn't like him, and Aaron.
I like Pons too. I do.
So the Falcons aren't going to draft him if Aaron doesn't give his approval.
Because Tori, Jarvis cares about what Aaron says, even if you don't think anyone cares about what you say. Jarvis cares about what Free says.
But no, like I just love like a lot of times when I'll give shrimp cornerbacks. We want to go keep going with that term for the rest of the show because I just like messing with Aaron. A lot of times those guys have that, they have like a automatic like chip on their shoulder and they understand that they're little, but when you look at them, they totally understand that you're going to try to take advantage of them, or you're going to, not like give them that much credit, or just really just say, oh yeah, I got you, you little shrimp, little person, you're not going to do anything to me. But I actually like that, right? I actually like that mindset. I like that mentality because you need that as a cornerback, because sometimes the bigger guys don't necessarily have that because they aren't being doubted. They aren't being saying, oh, people are automatically going to assume that you can play because you're 6 feet, 195 and run a 4.4. Yeah, but sometimes you find out about those guys that they aren't the type of, they don't have that mindset, or they don't have what you're looking for in a cornerback and having a short memory. So I really like what I saw from D'Angelo Pons. Of course, Avion Terrell. He's a guy that, I feel like he might go first round, but there's a possibility that he could fall back because, a lot of general managers think the same way Aaron does.
And so I think, Free, that's Jarvis's way of reminding us that he's a D Alford apologist, 5'11", 180, just saying.
Hey, T, don't do that.
Here we have nothing but love for D, but I just had to throw that in there since we're on that kick.
Fair,
Real quick,
fair.
day 3, day 4, wide receivers, O-linemen. Anybody shine for you, Free?
Trying to think wide receivers. No one's
That the
coming to
Falcons
mind.
can actually go after.
Yeah.
With what they have currently for the draft.
I'll go with an offensive lineman as I sit here and think about the wide receivers. A player that I was intrigued with in terms of, we talked before about Bill Callahan and being one of the best offensive line coaches in football these last 20 some odd years, and sort of a tendency for the teams coached by Bill Callahan to just kind of be like, we're going to bet on the traits. And I remember having a conversation with Jarvis a couple of weeks ago on Locked On Falcons, where it was like, if Bill Callahan was the Falcons offensive line coach back in 2014, he would have drafted Greg Robinson over Jake Matthews. Like, that's the type of coach that Bill Callahan is like, well, I can coach up the rest. Like, you don't grow guys, those guys only grow in a lab when it comes to players like Greg Robinson. And one of the players that I kind of circled as one of those potential options that we saw down at the Senior Bowl, and I don't know how to say his last name, but it's the Arizona State offensive tackle, Max Nacho or something. I don't know how to say his last name, but he tested really well. And it was like, he's a little raw. He's got some development that he has to do. He's sort of the classic second round offensive tackle, and we'll see if he climbs enough to potentially go in the first round. That was one of the things coming out of the Senior Bowl where people were like, hey, he could sneak into the first round, and coming off of this combine, he could still have that trajectory and whatnot. But he's one of those guys that I think Bill Callahan would love to get his hands on as a developmental right tackle to replace Caleb McGarry. And so he's one of the offensive linemen that stood out to me the other day.
And what about you, Jarvis? Any wide receivers, any O-linemen other than, and by the way, it's Max Henachor from Arizona State.
I was close. Get them tight. So for me, I know Aaron about to roll his eyes at me, but, I don't know why I'm picking on Aaron today, but, we just going to flow with this thing, right? The guy that I feel like will be an excellent fit for Bill Callahan's system, he would really love him. He could potentially slide in at that center spot. Keelan Rutledge, he actually murdered the combine this weekend. When you're talking about just gritty, has excellent backstory, like if you're into those type of things, like got into an accident, potentially could have lost a limb, and he ended up coming back from it and just had 2 excellent seasons with the Yellow Jackets, and coming from Middle Tennessee State, you kind of understand, like, okay, this guy trying to take a step up, right? Those are what coaches are looking for nowadays in the portal, like guys who are playing on lower levels and they are moving up versus guys who just trying to get a bag, like those type of guys that Brent Key is looking for when you're talking about, hey, how can I upgrade my roster without bringing in guys who just coming in for the bread? So I think that Keelan Rutledge is the guy that I thought he made himself some money over the weekend. And I'll highlight another guy from Tech as well, Eric Rivers. That man ran a 4.35 at 5'11", 180. That is, you can't teach fast. And he's projected to kind of go lower to almost maybe undrafted, essentially. But I think that when you go out and run a 4.3 and you kind of go through those drills and be one of the best guys, like that gauntlet drill, just so smooth, just running through it. You see, he just runs with ease and catches the ball and just kind of keeps moving. He's just a flow type of guy. Those are guys that you kind of look for when you're talking about being able to run the entire route tree and be able to be the guy when they got one-on-one coverage. So I feel like those 2 guys who are guys that really stood out to me, because I feel like Rivers could have had a little bit more production, and he had it at FIU. When he was at FIU, he led the conference in touchdowns, and he was just an absolute production monster. But, Buster Faulkner, who used to be the OC for Georgia Tech, was a little bit different as far as what he wanted to do on offense, so he wasn't able to be as productive. So, yeah, those 2 guys that really just stood out to me in that group.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to just ask you guys is, and this was kind of like a back and forth that I had on another show, but I was just curious to know, it was for like fans, what could make the combine more interesting or intriguing, and B, what's the real value of it when you know that a lot of those top prospects have pro days? Now, my response to that, just so you guys know, was, hey, there are like 77 schools and 319 players represented at the combine. So it's the easiest way for the league to get everybody in one building for the sake of those 32 franchises not having to go to, for example, 77 schools. But I do respect the question. So just if anyone knows that, if anyone has an idea or a thought about, hey, this is what would make this combine more entertaining for fans, or what would make it more kind of valuable, I was just curious to see what you guys thought. And anybody could answer that one.
Well, I know one of the things I was seeing some people tweet about over the weekend was that they wished, rather than them sort of just like a blanket praise when they're going through all the various drills, like be a little bit more critical and really get into the weeds about like why this guy's gauntlet drill is more impressive than this other guy's gauntlet drill. Like, and I think for maybe some of the more hardcore fans that are just like, especially those people that are more casual fans are just like, why are people watching guys run around in tights? Like, what are we supposed to be seeing here? Like, I think that would allow a little bit more insight into sort of the subtle differences that make it why like people are sitting there glued and it just all kind of looks the same if you don't know exactly what you're looking for. So I think that's something that they could probably do a better job of when they're doing the broadcast of the combine and just getting more into the nitty gritty. Like they do a good job of that, but I think they could do a potentially better job of that I think would help the average fan understand why the combine is such a bigger deal than I think probably at face value people assume it should be.
Yeah.
I think,
sorry, go ahead, Tori. Or Jarvis, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when it comes to, I kind of felt like this too when I was watching it. Like they were talking about, it was too many like mullet references for me. I was just like, what are y'all talking about? And then it was at one point, I think Daniel Jeremiah was like, all right, guys, back to the, critiques, whatever. And I was just like, man, thank you. I'm like, I don't mind going off the rails sometimes, but hey man, let's keep the main thing. And I think one thing that could make it very intriguing, I don't know if the NFL would do this, but I feel like if they can see what the potential ratings could be, and I feel like the ratings would be very high, start letting these cameras go into these interview rooms when they are talking to these players. I feel like that would be very reality show TV, and I feel like a lot of casual fans would be very interested to see how those meetings go and what happens in those meetings.
I will add, I think that everything about the combine that is valuable are the things that are not seen. It's the medical evaluations that every individual has to go through for every team. It is the conversations between GMs, assistant GMs, and scouts and agents and all of those things like that happen behind closed doors or at bars. Like that's just kind of like, those are the things that I think matter the most. At the combine, it's these like connection points and getting information. That said, I think something that, I don't know, would probably help me, like maybe the casual fan will be like, I don't give two about this, but like I kind of wish that when every single player comes up to the podium to do their little like 5 to 10 minute like scrum, that they start off and they say, here are the teams that I've talked to and here are the teams that I'm going to talk to, because I'm so tired of those interviews simply being, have you talked to the Falcons? Have you talked to the Saints? Have you talked to the Steelers? Have you talked to the Jets? Like, so like, those are like,
that's a good one.
Those are nothing burgers for me. So like, I really think if you could just like, kind of like go out and be like, all right, guys, like, welcome. Here are the people who I've talked to and who I'm going to talk to. Like, then we can actually get to some like meat on the bone, because everything else is just kind of like, there is no meat.
Yeah. And we were talking about as well the underwear Olympics component of it, and how sometimes that's why a Senior Bowl or an East-West Shrine game will be more compelling, because you really get to see some of those guys in action obviously you wouldn't get to see 319 guys in action, but those games kind of give a little bit more insight. And maybe, I don't know, Tori, because you guys know you've been certainly to the Senior Bowl, if it gives more context as far as like opportunities for scouts or GMs or AGMs to speak with players. But I think maybe it's the whole, hey, it gives like the simulation of a game, for lack of a better term, that might engage fans a little bit more. But I understand we all know that the feedback would be, we're not putting these players in a position to potentially get hurt. That would be the bottom line on that one. But that was something that people talked about, maybe wanting to make it more interesting, entertaining, or educational, as you guys said, so that people who are just casual fans, when they tune in, they actually have some idea of why all of this is going on. So can one more hire make a difference in the DB room for the Falcons? We'll download on it in the look ahead. This episode of our Falcon Squad Show is brought to you by Game Time. We live in a world where we can stream anything, order food in minutes, carry supercomputers in our pockets, and somehow buying tickets to a live game still feels complicated. Hidden fees, jumping prices, endless steps. There has to be a better way, and there is. Game Time app. It gives fans the advantage and making getting tickets simple, whether it's NFL games, concerts, comedy, whatever you're into. You can jump on the app to check out tickets for an upcoming game, and it honestly takes you minutes. You can see panoramic views from every seat before you buy. The price you see includes all fees, no surprises at checkout, and you could even spot zone deals where you pick the section and Game Time picks the seat for extra savings. 2 taps, and you have great seats locked in. Fast, easy, done. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but again, create that account, redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. So, Jarvis, the Falcons announced recently they hired Patrick Toney as defensive passing game coordinator. Toney, of course, comes to Atlanta after spending 3 seasons as DB coach for the Arizona Cardinals, working with all-pro safety Budda Baker, guiding him to earn his 7th straight Pro Bowl selection last season. How important of a hire is he as the Falcons look to shore up that DB room, whether it's in free agency or in the draft?
Well, I think, the hire is important because Rudenberg was such an important piece to what, this defense was just from an identity standpoint. So I believe that, Jeff Ulbrich probably had some insight into who they were looking at, and he probably had some questions he would, as far as being at that part of that interview, And I think that when you have that type of continuity that Ulbrich had with Rudenberg, like the person that you replace him with is going to be almost just as important, because you have to not necessarily be exactly like him, but you have to bring something to the table when it comes to game planning and understanding what the back end of this defense wants to do, and making sure that is married well with that, what they're doing up front. So for me, I feel like it's important because like Rudy was a very important piece. And I think that when you have a guy like Jeff Ulbrich and a guy that you retained from the previous regime, like that lets me know that he probably has something to do with, bringing this guy in as well.
And for you, Tori, the hire of Patrick Toney as a defensive passing game coordinator, how important is he for the Falcons as they look to shore up that DB room?
I think very important. I mean, to everything that Jarvis said about, Mike Rutenberg and kind of what he was as Jeff Ulbrich's almost like right-hand man a little bit, like that relationship matters a great deal. And Patrick Toney, he's somebody who I would love to hear from, like, what Budda Baker is telling Jesse Bates, because I know like those two guys have a good like relationship kind of built on respect. And I guarantee you that like either Jesse or Budda like called one of the other guy up to like have a debrief on Patrick Toney, who has been the DB's coach over in Arizona the last few seasons before making the move to be the Ole Miss defensive coordinator for a month. And so I think like I would love to know, like, be a fly on the wall of that conversation of what Budda tells Jesse and what questions Jesse asks. So I think it's like, it's one of those that I think it makes a ton of sense just from what Patrick Toney's like previous stops have been. He has defensive coordinator at the college level. He's been a play caller at both Florida and Louisiana with Billy Napier. Like, so I think that like I would love to get to know him more and kind of what he is bringing to the unit, because I felt like I had a really good understanding of what Mike Rutenberg, what he brought to the unit, the type of coach he was, the type of right-hand man he was to Jeff Ulbrich. And I would love to know more about Patrick Toney and what his thought process is for this job.
Yeah, and I think Free, with that most recent combination that Tori mentioned, a little bit of the college ball, a little bit of pro football, and the because we don't know which direction the Falcons will go in as far as filling that, rounding out the DB room. So you like that background, but yeah, it's an intriguing hire, if for no other reason as well. You help Budda Baker to continue elevating his game.
Yeah, I think by all accounts, Patrick Toney is an up-and-coming coach, obviously being identified as, future defensive coordinator at Ole Miss before the Falcons stole him away. And, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, like, Patrick Toney doesn't have any sort of connections to this coaching staff. And so, we know in this business that, like, it's much more of a who you know than a what you know. And the fact that Patrick Toney was able to land this job kind of tells you that he got it purely off of merit than necessarily like, hey, 5 years ago when we were both low-level assistants at some other place and we were like, hey, if I get to be a defensive coordinator or head coach, I'll hire you to be my guy. Like, that's kind of how this business works. Like, that doesn't appear to be the case, at least for me, at face value with Patrick Toney. So, I think this, going back to what Tori and Jarvis said, like, I think this is a smart hire for the Falcons, that they're catching this coach on his upward trajectory, similar to what they were able to do with Mike Rutenberg before he ultimately became the Browns defensive coordinator. And the expectation is that he'll be a very successful defensive coordinator. And it feels like Patrick Toney is on that similar trajectory, that he can come here to Atlanta, kind of prove himself in a system that, we saw work at a high level and has been very effective these last couple of years, whether we're talking about Jeff Ulbrich's defenses in New York, Robert Saleh, et cetera. This is a defensive system that seems to work, and we'll see, how Patrick Toney affects it, because we know that pass defense was the strength of the Falcons defense last year, and a big part of that, as Jarvis and Tori have said, that was Mike Rutenberg's baby as the defensive passing game coordinator. And hopefully the Falcons can continue building off of that with Patrick Toney as a up-and-coming assistant coach.
Thanks to our everydayers for making the Falcons Squad Show your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with your host, Aaron Freeman, as your second listen. And also check out his frequent contributor, Jarvis Davis, on Locked On Falcons as well. And of course, you can head over to AtlantaFalcons.com for just some of Tori's great work as a senior Falcons reporter. We appreciate you guys, as always, for stopping by the Falcons Squad Show and Locked On Falcons, both part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. We will see you next time.